This podcast is brought to you by True Resources, connecting talented people with the best mining employers in the Australian market. For more information, head to trueresources.com.au. So hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. Joining me on the show today is Richard Henning, the Managing Director of Ilala Metals, which is approaching an IPO on the ASX. And I don't actually know the code yet, but I'm sure you've got some ideas as to what it's going to be. But welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ben.
So let's start with your history before we dive into the story of the IPO. You're a mining executive now, but previously a geologist and a fair bit of time in that realm. So I always find it fascinating how the geos then find themselves in the MD roles. But talk us through your history in mining.
It's checkered, and I guess I'm a bit of a mongrel, really. If you look back there, look, I qualified as a geologist. I graduated as a geologist. I came out to Australia initially, and then ended up back in the UK, which you probably figured is where I'm from,
accent,
right?
Yeah.
So I worked for 5-6 years as a well-site geologist. Then I got into technology commercialization, actually, with a total change of focus. I worked at St Andrews University with a number of Scottish universities, and we looked at ways that we could take technology out of the universities and put them into the industrial sector. That led me into funding those projects, led me into VC, venture capital, brought me eventually back to Australia. I spent a number of years here in Perth trying to understand investment in technology and realized after a fairly short space of time that it was a little bit too difficult. And really, when you're in Perth, the most understandable commodity is resources and mining. And being a geologist, I found it reasonably easy to move back into that area. I found someone that I enjoyed working with, and I joined Extract Resources back in 2007, I think, and it's been a good ride from then.
Okay, so then Extract Resources, is that now the shift to Ilala Metals, or how does that sort of journey start?
Look, we were very successful with Extract. We had initially the company had gold projects here in Western Australia. We sold those up to concentrate on uranium in Namibia, and I've always enjoyed technology, energy, and uranium was really on a high at that time. So we spent a lot of time in Namibia. From the first hole, I guess, to selling 5 years later, we worked through the process of defining the resource, eventually building up a value in the company that people could actually understand. And the Chinese bought that for, I think it was $1.8 billion in after 5 years. So it was a good start. It was a good story. From there, I moved into a company called Stonehenge, which had uranium assets, vanadium and uranium, in South Korea. And I enjoyed my time in South Korea, but as all uranium projects happened to be hit at that time with Fukushima, it just didn't work. The Koreans were hit very hard by Fukushima. The uranium industry really dropped to its knees. And I've spent a few years since then working on other projects, gold in Western Australia. And then this opportunity came up to look at a uranium project in Botswana. And to me, it was comfortable at that time. I had a look, and it just seemed right. And since then, of course, we've moved on, and there are other projects which are every bit as exciting as uranium. So it's back to my roots, as it were.
So you've been really focused on uranium for the majority of your career, and learning the ins and outs and the market cycles of that
absolutely.
utility.
And there's a lot of guys that have a lot of, if you like, grandfathers of the industry that have a lot more in-depth knowledge of the uranium industry over the years than I do. But I've certainly been a part of that ride. I've learned a lot from them over the years. I could name them, but they probably know exactly who they are. And I've always been fascinated by the opportunities that uranium has, particularly within the energy cycle and the energy mix. And it has to be there, right? It's a given.
And that takes us to now Ilala Metals, which, if someone's never heard of it, and you're on the march now, building up the company and talking about it and getting the news out there. But for someone that's never heard of it before, how do you describe what that company is all about?
Okay, so first and foremost, the ticker is going to be IL1, right?
IL1. Okay, cool.
ASX IL1. The company is based in Botswana. So all of my African experience was Namibia. Namibia, Botswana, very similar countries. Legislation the same, sovereignty pretty much on par. One thing I love about Botswana is the relationship that it has with Western Australia. There's a fantastic professional and social relationship that exists between the two countries. It's very safe, it's secure, they understand mining. 40% of their GDP comes from mining. And as a place to go, it was comfortable, it just made some sense. When you combine that with the opportunity of working in the uranium industry alongside a company that has been there since 2006, 2007, that being then ACAP Resources, now Lotus Resources, you see that we're neighboring somebody with a company with great experience in that area. So really a lot of the work has been done for us in terms of the jurisdiction within the country itself, the mining legislation that is there, the in-country expertise that exists both in administration and in geology, and the willingness of the government to continue to work with Australian companies.
So, yeah, with that point there about the synergy or even the ability to work between each other, can you just elaborate a bit more about that? Like, what are some of the potential benefits or trade agreements, or what's the sort of the talk about them working really well together? It's
not so much a trade agreement as that, well, for example, our advisor here in Perth is a guy called Modisana Batsile. And Mod used to work for the Department of Mines and Energy within Botswana. He has been integral in advising us. In fact, he brought some of the projects to us initially. The uranium projects were initially his some years back. He brought that to us, and with that, he brought with him the contacts that he has within the government and within the local working community. So that has made it very easy for us. He's now in Perth, so that link was established. I know that there's a number of government ministers that do enjoy visiting Perth on a regular basis. And as with Namibia, it is just the language, I suppose, is common. The background is secure. And again, the relationship just works.
Looking at the company, there's a focus on uranium and copper, and we'll start foremost with the uranium. You just said there that the package was brought to you probably a few years ago. What's the lineage of how this package and project's been built up?
So I mentioned earlier that Fukushima had a dramatic effect on the industry, particularly uranium resource industry, and getting funding for that. I think back around about that time, ACAP Resources had to relinquish some of their leases in the Botswanan area in where we are, their Letlhakane project. And Motsana happened to be there at the right time and put his foot on the leases. He sat on them for a while, looked for a good company that would take them on, and he chose Ilala for that course. So we have Cerule being our major project in Botswana, but we also have another 4 or 5 different uranium licenses in and around the area. That gives us the opportunity of looking at medium to early stage exploration projects, but also Cerule, which is probably our flagship, which is, we expect, an extension of what Letlhakane has with Lotus Resources. And we are right on their fence line. We're 800 meters from the last hole that they drilled on the western side. And the drilling that we have done as a very early part of our exploration suggests that the mineralization that they had then extends into the ground that we have now.
Okay, so then that clearly is part of the focus, I would assume, for the IPO is raise some money for exploration, or what? How is that project going to be developed? Or
I suppose, look, and I should, when I say we, I can't take all the credit because I've only been with the company a few months. But before that, there was in the region of $850,000 raised by seed capital, for seed capital, and the decision was made by the company to put that money into early stage exploration before we got to the stage of IPO. So we're actually hitting the ground running. In the Cerulli project particularly, we've drilled 8 holes on that fence line right next door to the Lethlakane deposit. And 7 of those have come back with what we see as a mineralized zone. We don't have the assays yet. The assays will come back, and I'll talk more about that later because I dare say you're going to ask me about news flow.
100%.
We'll have the assays in a short space of time, but in the meantime, we do have some downhole gamma ray results, which suggests that we are in exactly the area that we needed to be. We're about 100 meters downhole with 2 distinct mineralized zones, and the gamma ray shows that we have the counts per second that indicate that is uranium. So we're optimistic that we're in the right place. It's just a matter of how far that extends to the west, and that's the drilling that we will do from here at this point on. So we've used the seed capital to justify the fact that we're there. We don't have the assay results to whet the appetite, if you like, of the investors, but it certainly has given us a start. And of course, by doing that, we previously had to do all of the permitting, the ESIA permitting, which is essential for, particularly for uranium mining. All those permits are now in place. We have the workforce in place. We have the drill teams ready and set up for the next stage of drilling. We have the admin team in Botswana, in Gaborone. And for an early stage company and pre IPO, we're actually pretty well established.
So, I mean, talking about the landmass you've got, you're going at an area that, again, next door, literally 800 meters away, is a proven resource, and the uranium there. The logic is start there and then, I guess, expand downwards. But I mean, how much space and room have you got within your project? Because you said there's quite a few that are in the license as well.
Yeah, we've got almost 300 square kilometers just in the Cerulli project itself. We have a total landmass of 7,700 square kilometers throughout the uranium and copper project. So we have a substantial landmass or land base. There are other areas, I guess, that we will focus on in the near term. For example, one of our uranium projects up to the northwest, I believe, is very similar to the Liner Hendrik deposit in Namibia, which of course Paladin currently have and will start to develop again and produce uranium from that project. So we have other opportunities, but right at this point in time, Cerulli looks like it will give us the first indication from drilling of mineralization, and we have, as I say, we have over 250 square kilometers of ground to our west, which hopefully will be still open and will give us the results that we require.
So the upcoming drilling campaign, is there any indication about how much you're going to be drilling, how many drill holes and the depths and that, or is it just more of
it's one
ongoing
step at a time, really.
Yeah.
We get the assays back. From the downhole gamma ray, we expect the assays to be in line with what was previously drilled by Lotus and ACAP at Lethlakane. We will then continue to step out drilling to the west and obviously infill. At the moment, the holes are 800 meters apart. We have 7 holes, each of about 800 meters apart. So our breadth of drilling is over 2,500 kilometers. Right? So we'll go west of that. We'll infill those drillings, those drill holes, and that hopefully will lead to certainly initially an inferred resource and then something of a more indicated nature as we go.
Okay, so you've got this happening, and simultaneously you've got copper as another, I guess, component of the company.
Yeah.
And I've spoken with a few about the copper region in Botswana, but can you just elaborate a little bit more for those that have never really heard of the copper region and the copper opportunities there?
And you know that is a very good point, because when I first looked at Ilala, the initial focus was the uranium. Then we got to look more deeply at what we had in copper, and it started off being relatively appealing, and now actually is quite compelling. The Kalahari Copper Belt is fairly new area in terms of the Central African Copper Belt, which is up in the DRC a little bit further north, which has been one of the most prolific copper producers of the last 20 years, producing more than 14% of the world's copper. Right? Kalahari Copper Belt is to the south of that. It extends from Namibia on a southwest-northeast orientation. And it has become and is becoming one of the most extensive areas for exploring and developing copper in that Central African belt. being mostly, of course, Botswana. So we were extremely fortunate, and we have 5 different areas, leases that we've acquired in and around the Kalahari Copper Belt. But one of them is what we call the Central Copper Belt. It originally looked like it was a fringe project, but the more work that we've done and the more information we get from our neighbours and where they're drilling and the actual trend line of the copper suggests that we really have a tiger by the tail here. It's in the right area. It's close to a company called MMG that have the Khoemacau deposit. That's one of the largest copper deposits in country. Over 100 million tons copper at 2%. We are on the same formation contact line as them. Their latest discovery was what they call Zone 9, is less than 800 meters away from our boundary. We're just north of Sandfire, which they're doing wonderful things with their mod resources. And we're in the right location. All of a sudden, we have the right commodity. We have a location which is right bang in the middle of the what we have now called the copper corridor, which seems to be a trend line running through all of the Khoemacau deposits. And it's just a matter of getting on and drilling. We've done some ground surveys, some ground magnetics, which indicate that we have exactly the contacts which have been previously drilled that show exactly where those discoveries are. And we now need to do a little bit of EM work, to further electromagnetic work, to further define that contact. And again, all the permitting is done, so we start drilling as soon as that's finished.
And yeah, you mentioned there a couple of the neighbours, and Sandfire notably is one of the bigger ones. Talking about the accessibility and the infrastructure, I mean, again, it's going into a region that is, most, it's pretty remote, but talk about what the actual area is like and potentially the accessibility that you will have.
The area is largely under sand. There are some outcrops, but largely under sand. At best, probably it gets a little bit deeper further south, but where we are, the sand cover will be around 25, 30 meters. There's a sealed road from Gaborone through Francistown, about 15 kilometers to the northeast of our lease. Khoemacau, obviously, or MMG, have done a great deal of work there. They're producing phenomenal amounts of copper at an incredibly cheap rate. They already have a mill there. All of the infrastructure is in place. It's a stand up and start drilling target for us.
Gotcha. So that's quite. So you're balancing, in a way, 2 commodities that we know have got a bit of attention: copper and uranium. I mean, how is the balance going to be across them, and how do you, I guess, utilise the capital wisely to make sure that you're getting the best from both? What's the thought processes for that?
Well, we have 14 leases in total. We've also got a small lithium project in Namibia, just right on the border of Namibia and South Africa in the Orange River. We don't tend to talk too much about that because at this point in time we've got so much else excitement going with the uranium and the copper. So our target in terms of the IPO is to raise 5 million, with the potential, if we are oversubscribed, to take up to 8. We have a 2-year drilling program. The 2-year drilling program that we have will focus almost entirely on Central and Cerule, because that's where we see the maximum, if
upside,
you like, bang for the buck.
Yep.
We have other projects in Ngami land I mentioned, which was similar to the Liner Hendrik. We have other copper projects in Ngami northeast, which is again very close to that corridor. We'll continue to work there. If we raise 8 million, we will do a lot of groundwork over all of those areas. If we only raise the 5 million, we still have enough cash to be able to focus entirely on getting the results at Cerule and in copper and the Central Copper Belt. So 5 million gives us a comfortable drilling target. Drilling is reasonably inexpensive in Botswana, certainly compared to other parts of the world. And the drill rigs are ready to go.
Okay. And you were mentioning again before that there's a few people here, but the team is predominantly built in Botswana. And I can imagine that's a key component of having in-country team and also building up the knowledge and expertise there. So can you elaborate a bit more about how that team is going and finding it and what they're doing at the moment?
They are very much under the guidance of our chief geologist, a guy by the name of Andrew Pedley. Andrew is based just south of Botswana in South Africa, Andrew's got a lot of experience in Africa. He, in fact, we knew each other many years ago when I was with Extract. He was with a company called Uranium, which also had a uranium project just to the north of where we were. So he's worked in South Africa and in country Africa for a lot of years. He is entirely in control of our project and our expenditure, and obviously reports to me and to the board. But Andrew will be Impili, our geologist, Mike, our admin guy. He will control the direction and the exploration expenditure in country.
Okay. And if I go back, it just crossed my mind talking about Botswana and 40% of the GDP being mining. As expected, you would assume that there's a fair bit of support and acceptance from government and legislation. You said you have a lot of your permits, but how is their approach to mining now progressing more so to be welcoming of international groups coming in and developing projects and rewarding? Because there's always been a few question marks about Africa's massive and there's always differences, but how's Botswana now approaching internationals coming in?
They used to say about Namibia, they used to say it was Africa for beginners. I think a similar thing could be said about Botswana. Botswana are extremely friendly towards bringing external mining companies in, particularly because they want to diversify. Their initial mining, that 40% that we mentioned, was almost entirely from diamond mining.
Yeah.
Look, I can't speak for the direction that the Botswanan government want to take in that, but certainly they're very keen to diversify from mining into copper, uranium, and other commodities as they present. So the willingness is there for them to diversify into other commodities.
Well, that's good because, we always known that Africa is just a treasure trove of natural resources. It's just about seeing which countries are, which parts of Africa is taking the lead on it. And it's quite an exciting timeline. You've got $5 million planned to raise with the upwards of potentially $8 million if oversubscribed. When and how is that process going? We're currently speaking Friday the 9th of August, and by the time this probably comes out, there'll be a few more updates. But how is that, conversation going with investors? What's the feedback like? What's the general questions coming from them as well that you're getting?
The prospectus, took a little longer to put together than we anticipated. And really because we have started quite a lot of the work in Botswana, so we had legals, we have companies there. There was a lot more to the prospectus than simply an IPO in one particular lease in Australia, for example. So we completed the prospectus about 2 weeks ago. We had what they call then an exposure period of 1 week. Last week, with our lead manager, BW Equities, we did extensive roadshows in Perth, Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. As you can imagine, the initial response was, it's a tough market, tough time to be doing an IPO. We'll give you 15 minutes. And 35, 40 minutes later, we were still talking. And look, frankly, they were saying this is one of the best IPOs that they've seen over the last 18 months. So the feedback has been terrific. We opened for bids just this week. We opened for retail on Monday, and we start looking at some of the funds that we've been talking to in Sydney and Melbourne next Monday. That'll be a 2-week period, and we hope to close the IPO at the end of August.
Okay.
The reaction and feedback has been terrific, particularly from the companies that put some seed capital in at that 850 mark that I mentioned. They're very keen to come in again, and we've got lots of new guys that some are interested in the uranium, all are interested in the copper, but as a package, it's a very exciting story.
Okay, so again, closing potentially the end of August, and then the timeline of when the ASX rings the bell or you get to ring the bell. What's the sort of progression towards that for those that are wondering when the ticker does go actually live and they can put it in their check,
if we are
their watch
successful
lists?
in raising even $5 million by the end of August, we should be ready to ring the bell third week in September.
Okay, so that's looming up very quite quickly.
It is.
Just so.
It is, and we're looking forward to it because we've done the amount of work that we've done so far. We're not going to be hanging around. As soon as we have that the cash in the bank, we're ready to drill and we can get the news flow coming.
Well, speaking of news flow, what can people expect coming out from the company? Really for the end of this year, but going into 2025, what can investors, what can listeners anticipate coming from the company? I'm assuming the assays is probably at the top of that list. But
you're right. So and it's a question that's been asked of us. Why didn't we get the assays done before we put the prospectus together? kind of complicated, but because the prospectus took as long as it did, the assays weren't actually ready. It was just a process of getting everything ready for the assays. In Africa, we've now got the CRMs. They will go to the lab next week. We expect to have them in 2 weeks' time. In fact, more by luck than by judgment, they will be the first cab off the rank when it comes to news flow. We should have those assay results almost immediately after we IPO, last week of September. That will be the first news flow, as you said. You're absolutely right, and I expect that'll be a very positive news flow. Then we will do the EM work on the Central Copper Project to further define our drill targets there. We'll have those drill targets properly and very accurately defined, so we'll be able to announce where those targets will be, what our expectations are. We will then have, in no particular order, we'll have our second round of drilling at Cerule, because with the first results, we'll know exactly where we want to drill the second time round. And it'll be continual news flow from that point on. I mentioned we don't have to worry about permits. We have cash in the bank. We can just drill. So we'll be drilling Cerule and reporting on that. We'll be making absolutely sure we've got the right target to drill in Central, and the central targets from the ground magnetics that we have already show that we are spot on the contact point that we need between two particular formations. Those two formations are where you have to be if you want to find copper in the area. We know exactly where we are. We've got the anticline. We know the subsurface structure. We're going to be a little bit more careful on perfectly identifying as best we can where that first drilling will going to be, and then of course we'll have the results fairly quickly thereafter. So without going too far into 2025, before 2024 is over, we'll have drilling results from both Cerule and copper, and a very good indication of where we go from there.
And I hope this isn't making you repeat what you've just said, but like encapsulating everything that we've talked about today in really like key takeaways, because I find that people love those. What would be some of the key takeaways that you would urge investors to remember from what we've just talked about today about Ilala Metals into the future?
Key takeaways. Well, we've done a lot of the work. You can never de-risk a project, but we've done a lot to de-risk this prior to the IPO. So in terms of an initial investment, there's a lot of information that is there to give you a reasonable judgment as to whether you want to invest in the company or not. The news flow will be there. So post-market support is essential. There's a lot of IPOs recently that have been successful and have dropped immediately after because they didn't have the post-market support. We've got a very tight investment structure. The guys that came in as seed capital, pre-seed capital, and before the IPO will stay with the company. There is a degree of escrow there, and it's a very tight structure. Our enterprise value at launch will be 5.6 million, with only 60 million shares on issue. So it's as I said before, the copper project is compelling. Our capital structure, I think, is equally so.
Yeah, you've got to, as I said, balance now uranium, copper, and without talking about too much, lithium in the background, which is, again, you've got a smorgasbord of potential there. And
I think so.
Yeah, for those that are looking to engage with the company, potentially reach out and speak with you, as I know MDs are now almost obligated to have phone calls with any and every investor that wants. But how can people reach out and follow the company as you go down this news flow pathway?
Well, clearly I'd like people to have a look at the presentation that we put on our website. And the website obviously also has the prospectus there, and with the prospectus an opportunity to submit applications to the IPO. So our website is ilalametals.com, www.ilalametals.com. And on that website, you'll see the presentation, you'll see the prospectus. There'll be a lot more geological information that I haven't really been able to give you today. And everything is there that people require to make a determined decision.
Yeah, well, I'd urge people to go there because, talking about the maps and the geology and talking about them without really having them in front of me is quite hard to and many. Yeah. But for those that are interested in exploring those, go there. But thank you so much, Richard, for taking the time to speak with me on the show. And looking forward to seeing the bell ring in hopefully early September and watching the news flow come out. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ben, and it's been great to talk.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. Please remember that the topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial advice. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, share, and follow. You can follow The Market Bull on all our socials and keep up to date with global market insights.